All right. Well, I think we're right at 1 o'clock on the dot, and I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So thank you so much for joining us today or watching the recording. I wanted to just note really quickly that we only have 45 minutes today and we have a lot of information. So if you have questions, please feel free to type those into the chat and we'll answer them at the end, or you can hold your questions until the end and we'll do our best to get through all of them. And so I want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Potter. I am the Education Program Manager of John Burton Advocates for Youth, or JBAY. And for those who might be unfamiliar with our organization, we do advocacy on behalf of youth and young adults who have experienced foster care and or homelessness. And we primarily focus on education, health, and housing. I will turn it over to my co-presenter, Minty, to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mindy Corliss. I am with the San Diego County Office of Education's Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program. Work very closely with Sarah and really trying to work on getting our seniors filling out their FAFSA, and look forward to having you all here today with us.
All right, so just a quick overview. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of college, especially for our youth who have experienced foster care and or homelessness. And then we're going to share some tips on creating a college-going culture. I'll go through some technical details about registering and paying for college, including applying for financial aid. And then we'll close out with some really helpful resources and tools that are available and free to use. And hopefully, if we have enough time, we'll get through that Q&A. If not, we'll leave our contact information up so you know how to get a hold of us. So I'm going to kick off today. I want to just share a couple reminders about why college is so important. And so as you can see on this slide, this kind of talks about what happened during the last great recession when the housing market crashed. And so after that crash, we lost millions of jobs, 5.5 million jobs specifically, that went to people who had a high school diploma or less. And these are jobs that once the economy started to recover, that were never regained. So these jobs just disappeared. And the jobs that we saw come back during the recovery and the openings, the job openings, required an associate's degree or higher. So these are 5.5 million jobs that just evaporated as a result of the recession. That really shows just how important it is to have post-secondary education when it comes to these economic storms that we have yet again seen ourselves weather as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so when we think about our youth who've experienced homelessness or have foster care involvement, we want to make sure that they are going to have all of the resources and education that they need to be economic, to climb the economic ladder and to be self-sufficient in the long run. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the foster youth college aspirations versus realities. And so when researching foster youth's aspiration and their goals, we found that 86% of transition age foster youth indicated that they wanted to go to college. They had college dreams and ambitions, but yet only 55% enrolled. And of the 55% who enrolled, only 11% ended up completing a 2 or 4 year degree by age 26. So you can see that there's a really significant disconnect between the amount and the number of foster youth who want to go to college and those who are able to successfully complete a post-secondary program. And when we started to dig into this a little bit better and sort of figure out why, one of the things that we came across is that nearly half of the foster youth revealed that they just did not receive enough assistance with college planning. They just weren't getting enough support and high touch sort of one-on-one support to make their college dreams a reality. So this is why we focus so much on post-secondary matriculation and working with adult supporters of foster youth and homeless students. The other thing, we get asked a lot, it's like, so why so much talk about financial aid? And so simply put, financial aid is the single biggest indicator as to whether or not a student will persist in higher education. Unfortunately, many foster youth students and homeless students aren't accessing all of the financial aid that's available to them. As an example, only 50% of foster youth attending community college actually receive the Pell Grant, even though 90% of them are eligible. So they're quite literally leaving millions of dollars on the table that they could be using to pay for their post-secondary education and also their living expenses while they're pursuing their degrees. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Mindy to talk about how we can create a college-going culture.
Thank you, Sarah. So really, again, the slide here saying early messaging is key. That is extremely important. And we're going to talk a little bit about that engagement and those pieces. Next slide, please. So again, we want to be encouraging that engagement for foster and homeless students and youth. We want to set that bar high. We want to have expectations that they are going to meet that performance level. They will graduate, they can graduate. And how far will you go? Really, again, setting that mindset of this is possible is extremely important. And again, when I go to college, not if I go to college, those kind of just mindsetting. You know, I always go back to when I was a young child, my great grandmother, I had the fortune of knowing, but she always said, when you go to college, nobody in my family had ever been to college at that point in my life. But that was always the expectation. And that's what our students in foster and homeless need to hear. And I'm going to actually have the next slide go back to Sarah.
So one of the things that I don't often talk about in my presentations, but love to bring up when it's relevant, is that I grew up in the foster care system here in San Diego. So I entered foster care at 18 months old and I emancipated at 18 years old. And this was prior to extended foster care. And I'm getting some background noise. If folks who aren't talking could mute themselves. I think, Maria, if you could mute yourself, that would be great. We're getting some background noise.
I might tape it to the table. That's a good idea. It's right there.
Unfortunately,
right
I can't.
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
I can't mute her myself.
I want to see them.
And I don't want to scream over her. Hey,
just going to tape it down right in front, right there, you know?
Hey, Maria, if you could mute yourself, that would be great. Oh, shoot. I don't think she can hear me. I'm not sure she's following.
My apologies. Sorry.
Thank you, Maria.
Sorry.
What I wanted to talk about was when I was in elementary school, I had a wonderful, wonderful teacher. Her name was Miss Glasser. And at the time that I was in her class, my mother was in prison. I was going through sort of all of these life changes and sort of realizing what it meant to be a young person in foster care and just how different that made me from my peers. But one day we were just kind of sitting in our pods in class and I was working on an assignment and she came up behind me and said, you know, you're a really great writer and I think that you should enter the school speech contest. And I thought, really? Like somebody thinks I'm a good writer and thinks I should, you know, even take it a step further and enter a speech contest. And so lo and behold, I did enter the school speech contest and I won at my school. And then I got to go on and compete in the district level speech contest where I secured my very first college scholarship for $600. And so I really benefited tremendously from having that one caring, supportive adult who just sort of said that they believed in me, pushed me to do my best, raised the expectations like Mindy talked about, and then really kind of put me on a college trajectory. So she was just a wonderful example of what's possible when we engage and encourage our young people to shoot for the stars when they're going through unspeakable challenges at a very young age. So I wanted to give her a shout out and mention that this is really, really important. We kind of brush over this one, but it can make all the difference.
Thank you, Sarah. So really, again, some of the quick tips is that starting early. It's never too early to start that messaging of going to college. Again, even young children, For sure, by middle school, we should be having those conversations. But again, it's never too late either. And so really just making that, checking in with students. How are they doing in school? Is there anything that is going on that possibly could derail them from that outcome? You know, like Sarah showed, we have a lot of students who envision they want to go to school. But when we look at the numbers of who enrolls and who finishes, that number drastically declines. So what is making that not possible, and what would help to do that? Praising academic performance, like Sarah just shared in her own personal story. Knowing someone believes in you, that you can do it, makes all the difference. Visiting colleges' websites, looking at photos with students. Do you have other success stories of students that you helped get enrolled and they're being successful? Could they come and talk to students about that journey? Taking tours, you know, again, right now we know that's hard with COVID. You're not really able to just go on campuses, but post-COVID, really getting that exposure to see themselves on campus is extremely important, and to understand it's doable, and, you know, just getting that feel of the campus, and again, holding them accountable. I know you can do this. I know you got this. And that those check-ins regularly are extremely important. Next slide, please. And then inspire and motivate. What are the benefits financially, looking at the job market, at pay scales? What's the difference? We're going to share some of those resources later that you can do with students. And then also explaining those differences between high school and college. Explaining that it's self-motivated, that once you decide on your major, you're going to be able to take classes that you want to learn about, that you care about, that make a difference for you. Helping them explore their careers. Again, we're going to show some tools later, but what skills do they have? What could they build on? I know one time when I was working with student groups and we were kind of doing career exploration years ago, this one young person said to me that they wanted to be a biologist, like a chemical biologist of some sort. And I don't remember the exact one yet to this day, but at the time when I started going through like what the requirements would be, they're like, I hate science. Well, then that's probably not a good career option for you, right? So it's vetting those things out, looking at skill sets, and connecting to mentors and role models. Do you know someone who has that job? Can they come in and talk to the students about what did it take to get there? How could they get up that career path and ladder to aspiring to that potential option of whatever it is they decide they want to do? Next slide, please. So really, again, looking at those career options, it should start as early as middle school, and really thinking through that increases that motivation that there's a goal, there's something I'm working towards. And it helps to save time and money because you have that kind of career path laid out. You understand what it takes instead of, I'm going to go in with a general major, I have no idea, and you just keep floating through and changing degrees and you keep having to stay in it. Knowing what these reality testing and money websites that are listed here, the living wage calculator, you can look up what will you make if you do a certain career? What will that look like? What does it look like if you have a degree or not? All of those different resources. Salary Surfer and the CA Career Zone. Again, really picking those strengths, what it is you like, being able to build on that is extremely important for them setting that path of how to get to that goal. Next slide, please. And again, there's a lot of resources out there. This one in particular that we're showing right now is the Foster Youth Educational Planning Guide. The website for John Burton Advocates for Youth there is at the bottom where you can retrieve this resource. It's a step-by-step plan. It tells you why it's important to go to college. It explains what's like between a community college to a four-year and how to transfer, how to do financial aid planning. And it gives you checklists from grade 6 through grade 12. So you can really go through and look at what should you be doing at each step along the way. And again, really mapping that out and helping the student to plan for that long-term college and career planning. Thank you. Next slide. And this goes back to Sarah.
Thank you. And so I'm going to jump in and talk about some of the fun technicalities because a lot of maximizing financial aid and on-campus services and supports really does start with checking the appropriate boxes on applications. And so I don't want to brush over this because this is an incredibly important step when we're working with our students who are matriculating. To start off, I wanted to talk about the community college application. So when you're working with a homeless student who is filling out the CCC Apply application, they should be aware that there is an option when they're asked to produce their address that they can indicate they have no permanent address because they are currently homeless. So it's really important that they check that box because this is going to help the system already identify them as a homeless student. Similarly, when foster youth are completing the application, make sure that they check off the foster youth box when appropriate so that they also get connected to resources. And then once they complete the CCC Apply application, making sure that they're also then following up with any applications for EOPS and Next Step. Those are going to help them get additional on-campus supports and even access additional scholarship money, et cetera. The other thing to be aware of is that homeless and foster youth students are also eligible to receive priority registration so that they can get registered for classes that tend to be impacted and they can stick very closely to their academic plans. And this is available to students who were in foster care on or after age 16. And it's also available for homeless students who meet the McKinney-Vento definition of being homeless. They don't have to be unaccompanied, as a reminder, and they could even have been homeless within the 24 months prior to their college application to still be eligible for priority registration. So to get priority registration at the community colleges, students have to complete 3 steps. And the first is to participate in the college's orientation for incoming students. They also have to complete the assessment process so they get placed in the appropriate classes. And then they have to meet with their educational advisor or counselor to develop an education plan. So once they finish these 3 steps, they are eligible to receive priority registration. So homeless and foster youth students who attend CSUs and UCs are also eligible to receive priority registration. I wanted to mention too that they can also receive priority access to on-campus housing. So this is a really important reminder to get started on the process early before on-campus housing fills up. So again, I encourage folks who are working with foster youth and homeless students to check the specific campus that young person is planning on attending to make sure that they're aware of all of the deadlines and who they need to contact to access these benefits. So I want to spend the remainder of my time talking about FAFSA and financial aid applications and just sharing some tips and tricks on how to maximize financial aid. So the first thing to know is that applying for financial aid is not just completing the FAFSA or CADA and then, calling it a day. It's actually a 3-step process. And so it does start with completing the FAFSA or CADA. And then if you're working with a foster youth student who's eligible or was in foster care after the age of 16, completing the CHAFE application. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that entails. And then last but not least, making sure that that student is set up with a web grants account. This is particularly important for our students who have experience in foster care or experience with homelessness, because this is where they're going to get notified that they have to submit certain verifications for their status or for their documentation. And so they really need to have a web grants account and check it regularly to see if they need to produce anything to correspond or to go with their financial aid applications and make sure that they actually get their financial aid award. And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So when completing the FAFSA, there are 2 questions that pertain to foster youth and independent status. And remember, our goal here for both homeless and foster youth students is to make sure that they get independent status on the FAFSA, because that's going to ensure that they don't have to produce any of their parents' income information, but also it'll make sure that they have a zero, hopefully, expected family contribution. So then they're then eligible to get as much financial aid as possible. They'll have high unmet need in that instance. So the first question is around whether a youth is considered a ward or dependent of the court. And this is true if the court assumed custody of them for just one day. So if that is the case, and the court did assume custody of them for just one day at any time since they turned age 13, they should check this box. The other option or question is about guardianship. So if you're working with a youth in a legal guardianship at the time of filing, they would also be considered independent. So those are the two real specific foster youth type questions. One thing that I will note too is that this does not include youth who were in family maintenance or continue to live or reside at home with their parents where there was no sort of formal court intervention. Sometimes that gets a little bit confusing. So I wanted to make sure to call out those cases in particular. So once the student is deemed independent as a result of their answer to the prior questions, they will not have to provide parental income information. Additionally, if they receive income through SSI or they get extended foster care benefits, those do not have to be reported. They do not count as income for purposes of the FAFSA. And this is one of those areas that, again, it causes a lot of confusion.
Sure.
Karen, do you have a way of checking to
Charity,
see if
I think
there was
Thank you, Charity. I can't figure out how to mute people with my controls. So the reason why we emphasize so much about answering these questions correctly is to make sure that students have a low expected family contribution and can maximize their financial aid. And as an example, the Cal Grant has been expanded to better serve youth who have a foster care experience. And so they can actually apply to receive the Cal Grant at any time up to age 26. They have an extended deadline to get their FAFSA application in. So March 2nd tends to be the priority deadline for the competitive Cal Grant Awards, but foster youth have what's called an entitlement Cal Grant Award. So they actually have until September 2nd if they're a community college student to complete the FAFSA and still get a Cal Grant. And similarly, most students can only receive the Cal Grant for 4 years. Foster youth actually have an 8-year maximum time frame. And just this year, you may have seen in the governor's budget, they now, sorry, if you're not muted, can you please mute yourself? I'm getting some additional background. Thank you so much. And so foster youth are also able to receive $6,000 for non-tuition related costs through what's called a Cal Grant Access Award. So that just went into effect as a result of Governor Newsom's most recent budget. So great news there. I also mentioned that we want to make sure that after foster youth complete the FAFSA, that they also apply for a Chafee grant. What's nice about the Chafee grant is that they only need to submit an application once. So they don't have to complete it every year like they do the FAFSA. So once they complete the FAFSA, they can visit CSAC's website. You can see the link here, and they can complete the Chafee grant application and then receive up to $5,000 a year for education related expenses and tuition. So I want to talk a little bit too about what it looks like for homeless youth. So for homeless youth, verifying independent status is a little bit trickier. In addition to answering yes to the question on the FAFSA about homeless status or risk of homelessness, they must also submit verification of their homeless status. And so there are 3 individuals or entities who have the authority to make a homeless youth determination other than a financial aid administrator. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But those 3 entities are a local homeless education liaison, so they can write a verification letter. Also, any shelter or transitional living program that's funded through the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, so they are able to submit a verification letter. Similarly, any shelter or transitional housing program that's funded by HUD, so they're able to indicate yes and confirm the student is indeed homeless or was indeed homeless or is at risk of homelessness and should have independent status on the FAFSA. So I always have a couple questions on here because I know there might be some K through 12 folks who work in this capacity. Just some suggestions on how to have that verification conversation. One, because we want to be trauma informed, and also we want to be unassuming. Many students just might not know that couch surfing is considered homelessness. They might not, that might not resonate with them. They're probably unfamiliar with McKinney-Vento. So there's some resources and some conversation starters about how to ask these questions. And also just reassuring them that the information is not going to be shared unless they have their permission. There's a lot of fear. And so just kind of approaching that conversation sensitively. I will also recommend folks take a look at the resources on NACY's and Schoolhouse Connections website. They have templates for the verification letters. And so you can download those from the website. They also have additional resources on how to have the conversation with young people. So the other thing to mention too, I think I talked about this a little bit. If a youth who's experiencing homelessness or is at risk of homelessness is not connected with one of those three entities who can make a homeless determination, they can actually receive a determination from the financial aid office or financial aid administrator. And so the financial aid administrator, if they get a determination from one of those three entities, they first of all have to accept it. There's no sort of like going back and questioning and saying like, hey, are you sure, or is this accurate? The only way that they would be able to not accept the determination is if for some reason they have conflicting information that the student actually was not homeless. But they don't have the authority to disagree with the homeless determination. And I say this because at some point this was problematic. So this is something to be aware of. And then if a student is an unaccompanied homeless youth or homeless youth and they don't have someone who can make that determination, the financial aid administrator must make the determination. And they can do this based off of written verification from any sort of professional. It doesn't have to be one of those three that were previously listed. And they can also make the determination just based off of an interview that they conduct with the student. Written evidence from a third party sort of saying, yes, Sarah was homeless on XY date is not required. So it's important to kind of be aware of this because some students are going to need outside professional support to just navigate this process and make sure that that determination is submitted and they get independent status through their financial aid office. So just be aware of that. And then the last thing that I'll mention too is just to make sure if you're working with a student who's applying to a four-year university that they apply early. So some of the housing deadlines come early. And they also require deposits early. So it's really important to get connected and make sure that the student secures housing, but also that they have a financial aid or student aid report and that they have some sort of financial aid package that's being developed because once they've successfully completed the FAFSA and they get that student aid report, the programs will allow them to defer any costs until they receive their aid. So they won't have to put a deposit down. And then some institutions, if they have their own institutional scholarships or awards, some of those are awarded earlier. Some of them start reviewing applications kind of on a first come, first serve. So you want to make sure that you get connected and you start that process as well. And I think that is it for me. I'm going to turn it back to Mindy.
Thank you, Sarah. So we're going to go now into some of the things that we need to think about once we get through that financial aid process. And things that we're going to consider after that. Next slide, please.
Here we go.
So look, we really want to think about summer melt, that in between, what happens between, graduation and starting that freshman year, that attending in the fall. 10 to 20% of students who enroll in college don't end up attending in fall. And these are higher for first generation, low income, our foster and homeless population. So we want to make sure, again, that they're connected. Do they have that mentor, somebody that can be ensuring that they're getting connected to the campus? They understand what's possible, what supports are there, and create those bridges to getting to that fall semester. Next slide, please. So again, looking at when Sarah's talking about, in doing the financial aid verification, we see a lot of what happens is somebody fills out the FAFSA with their kids in foster or homeless, but then that last step that she talked about web grants, they never get the web grants filled out. They're not checking their emails because they're not super good at this and savvy at this point. And so unfortunately, they aren't verified. They don't receive the financial aid. Something wasn't right. Our kids move a lot. So maybe the school there was a school moving, things like that. So it's really important to make sure that they have been enrolled, their financial aid is verified, they're connected on that campus. Texting them over the summer. If you've been to any of my trainings ever, I always talk about connections. That's the most important thing, that are long-term outcome indicators for success and resilience with our kids. They need to stay connected, have somebody that can be checking in over that summertime. Again, visit that campus, understand where all those supports are there on campus, and we'll talk about those specific offices coming up. But again, are there summer bridge programs at that campus? Can a student be connected and attend and live on campus for a few weeks out of the summer, get familiar with the campus before their fall semester starts and get a jump start and make some friends? And again, that warm handoff when we can. So as they're going onto that college campus, let's find those support programs and services that we're about to talk about. And let's do a warm handoff for our students to make sure that they understand all the things that are available and at their fingertips there, but actually going to the physical offices and understanding where they're at is extremely important during that summer melt time. Next slide, please. So there are specific things on our college campuses, in particular our California community college campuses. There's the Foster Youth Success Initiative. And that means that all of our campuses have identified foster youth liaisons like our high schools do and our elementary schools, and all the things that happen for school stability in that K-12 arena. There are people at every campus to help our students get engaged on their community college campuses. And often they're in the financial aid office, so they're familiar with all the ins and outs around those services. Next slide, please. So again, when we look at these support services, they're usually a one-stop shop. They have all the linkages to all the campus support services. They target with counseling, with workshops. They often provide books and vouchers for the books and ways to get monies if needed for food, and also a community. They host dinners. They have those connections for the students. They do have varying names, as it says on the slide, at each campus, but every campus in California has some sort of foster support program that is available through this Foster Youth Success Initiative. And we actually host a list here in San Diego for our local community and colleges and universities. So you can feel free to reach out to me and I can provide that list at any time. Next slide, please. And so again, the Next Up program, it was formerly KFES, for any of you who may have been familiar with that before. But again, for students under the age of 26 who are attending our community colleges, they will be entitled to all these support services if they were in foster care on or before their 16th birthday. So they have to be at that or on or after their 16th birthday. I apologize. They must be enrolled in at least 9 units, and they also must apply for the EOPS programs on campuses. But as you can see, there's quite a list of resources, food, housing, tutoring, support groups, bus passes, all the things that are listed here. So it's extremely important for our students to get involved if there is a Next Up program as well on any campus, to get engaged and be receiving all the benefits and supports that they're able to provide. Next slide, please. And then EOPS and EOP are also on our college community campuses, both community colleges and our universities. But it's helpful for low-income, disadvantaged students. Again, it's those counseling, book grants. They have campus resources, and they link to supports and services around all the different things that maybe is a need for a first-time generation student, but they do fill up. And so it really is important to try to get enrolled in these services as early as possible, and also just to ensure our students have everything they might need. Next slide, please. So also there are homeless student liaisons. So every CSU and community college is also designated to provide the homeless student liaison contact. They often are different in the community college and university level, whereas in K-12, we tend to have people who overlap and do both. In the higher education, post-secondary, they often are different people. There's also a list of mental health resources. And again, those people who are designated often are gonna be well aware of how to look into financial aid for qualifying students, for knowing what resources they have available and connecting that student to make sure they're getting every single benefit possible that the student would need while they're on that college campus. Next slide, please. And so California College Pathways, if you have never visited their website, again, really highly recommend it. It is a resource for planning, financial aid, what campus supports are out there. There are so many tools and resources available to help with planning financially and personally for the student's success at higher education. Next slide, please. And again, most campuses have all of these resources listed and available to all students, but especially for our students who are formerly from foster care or currently in the extended foster care unit, or experiencing homelessness or have experienced homelessness, it's important to know that they have access to all of these resources: mental health support, food assistance, tutoring, students with disabilities. Most students don't think that if they had an IEP that can be translated into their higher education career as well. And also cultural supports and groups, extremely important for students who maybe haven't had that ability to have that identity while in high school. Next slide, please. And so lastly, again, the John Burton Advocates for Youth, who Sarah is a part of their organization, provide numerous resources and support as well. We participate yearly in what's called the FYSI challenge. So we're trying always to get the number of seniors in foster care completing their financial aid application yearly. But again, they have all sorts of counselors' toolkits. They have financial aid guides on top of the planning guide that we shared earlier. They have a wealth of information, and I'm sure their trainings for this next season are all about to hit, but they post everything on their website. They also have posters that you can gain and have to put up throughout your campus. So again, a very extensive website that's extremely helpful.
I will add there too, Mindy, that we have a financial aid guide for homeless youth that's coming out this year as well. And we're also coming out with a CADA guide in addition to like our FAFSA visual guide. So lots more new resources coming down the pike. All of it should be up by mid to late October. We try to correspond with the start of the FAFSA season on October 1st.
Awesome, that's exciting. Again, these are just some resources specific to students experiencing homelessness. So Schoolhouse Connection, again, a wonderful website, financial aid guide for homeless that JBay is doing and has released. Again, those webinars, they have that adult supporter webinar that they have on their website. I have attended that personally. It's extremely helpful if you are doing the hands-on with the students and going through the FAFSA with them. This training can be a game changer, and also their visual guide. Again, their website is full of different resources and opportunities to help students and get connected.
Right. And I think that we made it with like time to spare for questions. We did it, Mindy. We were really nervous about the 45 minutes, but we do have some time for questions if anybody wants to come off of mute and ask anything or type it in the chat. We also have our contact information on these slides if you'd like to follow up with us later, and I'm happy to drop that into the chat box.
You see how we got that though? No? Driving time varies inversely with the speed.
All right. I guess we can pause here, see if there's any questions or comments. I guess while we are wrapping up, I will encourage you all to go to our website at jbay.org. We have some amazing how-to webinars coming up in October on the 19th and 20th. Those webinars go through the FAFSA question by question. The first one on the 19th is for youth in foster care, and the one on the 20th is for youth experiencing homelessness. And so if you're working with those populations and want some more help on FAFSA completion, please come to that webinar because we will go through every single question and share some tips and tricks for completing it so those students get independent status.
40 times 50 is 2,000.
So I see the question, does it matter if a student was adopted at some point by their foster parent after age 16, would they still get foster services? Yes, they would. So 16 tends to be the magic number. That's currently the magic number for the Chafee grant. So as long as they were in foster care on or after their 16th birthday for just one day, they would be eligible. Similarly, if they were in foster care or a ward of the court or in a guardianship for at least one day after the age of 13, they would get independent status for the purposes of the FAFSA. But yes, they would be able to receive everything if they were in foster care for one or more days after 16. That is a good question.
Okay, so R is.
Hey, Sarah, there was something, do you mind going back? It was, I believe for foster students, they have until they were 26 to apply.
For Cal grants.
And then for homeless students, was that, it was different, right?
The Cal grant eligibility for homeless students, I'd have to go back and check to see if there's a special category, but I know that the Cal grant was expanded for foster students. I'm not sure about the answer for homeless students, but I can get back to you. If you drop in your email, I can follow up.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Area is 0.04, right? And the first thing we're going to do is solve for, oh, it doesn't even want us. Find an equation that relates to this. Oh my God. Okay, so R equals.
I'm writing down your question.
Is the first one. Yeah. What? We have to solve for K. Okay. That's what it wants us to do. Okay. So you want to go ahead and solve that? Yeah.
And for students who say they're foster and they're attending a community college right now, are they still eligible to then apply for the Cal grant if they, transfer to a CSU or UC, get that full tuition?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely. So long as they're under age 26, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're really excited too that now there's a $6,000 access award. That was amazing. So we know that's gonna help a lot. Yeah, great questions.
Sarah, I have a question. Did
Sure.
the bill pass that was going to line up the age 13 with FAFSA for our local laws?
So we had JBay sponsored a bill this year called SB 512, SB 512. And it is currently on the governor's desk awaiting signature or veto. So we're encouraging folks to send letters of support. There's a template. Sorry, it's really loud again. And I can't figure out how to mute people.
I know we did because that was the darn answer before.
So it's SB 512. I just put it into the chat. And it would lower the age of priority registration to 13. So it aligns with the FAFSA. Right now it's 16. And it would also change the eligibility for Next Step at community colleges. So that eligibility is currently 16. It would align it to age 13. And help serve more foster youth students. So if anyone wants to write a letter of support, we have templates on our website as well. We're hoping that the governor signs that soon.
Yes, that would be extremely helpful because sometimes those different age confuses.
It is really confusing.
Okay, all right, let's keep going. Suppose a teacher finds
All right.
that the scores.
Any other questions? Sorry about the background noise. I'm trying to mute people, but I don't have that authority on Zoom. But
So S
oh, thank you so much.
scores equals.
I will email you.
Yep. Plug in the first sentence.
I got a little love in the chat box.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for your wealth of knowledge. It's always, again, everything that JBay does around this information and getting it out is extremely important. And it was a pleasure to be able to co-present with you. And I really encourage folks to really look into those trainings they have coming up because they will be extremely beneficial.
Yeah, great. And feel free to reach out with any questions. I have my homework and my follow-ups, so I'll get back to both of the folks in the chat. And then, yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Sarah, for everything. Oh, she left.
The first person is Roger. It's the second part. Okay. Yeah, the 6.67.
So that's over.
Yes, now we're on the
I
next one.
also, I got through the recovery pretty quick because they were easier.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a new concept. Do you remember how to do rational or simple?
I don't know what they
Or
are.
say rational or radical? Okay, so yeah, we'll go ahead and listen to it. Now, he explains pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, so take notes if